blood-stained, the spotless white marble of the throne room. To Princess Lorraine Vox, it felt less like a sight and more like a physical blow to her mind. The Vexian syndicate thought they were hunting helpless pacifists, but they failed to account for the apex predator standing guard. Through the telepathic resonance of the hall, she felt the exact moment Captain Silas Vance's restraint snapped. It was a shock wave of pure, blinding violence. He didn't just fight. He tore through the armored assassins with a terrifying mechanical efficiency. Bone splintered, plasma hissed against flesh. He moved so fast it made her eyes ache, intercepting lethal strikes meant for her father and returning them tenfold. And for the first time in her life she understood the suffocating terror of being prey. It hadn't started this way. Only hours earlier, the Athelian citadel hummed with its usual serene, crystalline harmony. They built the 10,000-year empire on telepathic peace, until a Deathworlder's mind showed them the true cost of survival. Lyrian had spent the morning quietly observing the human envoy from Sol 3. Outwardly, Silas Vance was completely still, hands clasped behind his back in a crisp, dark uniform. But to Lyrian's telepathic senses, his mind was a blinding anomaly. Athelian minds were calm, sunlit lakes. Silas's mind was a cage storm. It boiled with an exhausting hyper-vigilance, constantly mapping exits, calculating sightlines, and measuring the threat level of every dignitary in the room. Truth is, her people's complete devotion to nonviolence left them dangerously blind. A perfectly peaceful society simply had no defense against those who didn't play by their rules. Curiosity had gotten the better of her. From her place on the dais beside Emperor Valerius, she sent a delicate mental probe toward the human, a feather-light brush against his consciousness. The reaction was instantaneous. It was like touching an open flame. Silas didn't just notice her intrusion. His mind snapped around hers, a defensive perimeter of raw pack loyalty and steel. His physical eyes locked directly onto hers across the crowded room. No Athelian could move with such sudden, jerky precision. It turned out, evolution on a hyper-lethal world required dense bones, heavy gravity muscles, and a nervous system wired for instant aggression. He held her gaze, a silent warning. She gasped, severing the connection, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then the western wall exploded. The deafening crack shattered the citadel's mental network. Acrid smoke and the sharp tang of ozone flooded the air. Vexian mercenaries poured through the shattered glass, their weapons already firing. The Athelian guards, scholars playing at security, froze in collective shock. But Silas was already moving. Before the dust could even settle, he crossed the vast floor. He hit the first wave of assassins with the force of a falling transport. A heavy strike crushed a Vexian throat. He ripped a blaster from a falling mercenary's grip, firing 3 times without even looking, dropping threats that hadn't even cleared the breach. He didn't run for the exit. He ran straight for the dais. Lorraine was paralyzed, choking on the panic bleeding from her dying people. Then a heavy hand grabbed her shoulder, shoving her hard to the ground behind the throne. Silas stood over her, his back to her, a solid wall of human defiance. The air around him practically vibrated with adrenaline. He was no longer an envoy. He was the storm made flesh. The throne room was secure, but the sky was burning. Through the shattered crystal dome of the citadel, Lyrene watched the stars blot out. A massive Vexian armada had dropped out of slip space, casting a long mechanical eclipse over the defenseless Athelian capital. They had come to finish the job. Silas didn't ask for permission. He didn't convene a council. He simply pressed a blood-smeared thumb to the comlink at his wrist and gave a single clipped coordinate. And then the Sol 3 fleet arrived. It wasn't a grand armada. In fact, compared to the sprawling Vexian dreadnoughts, the human ships looked like jagged, insignificant splinters of gray metal. But Lyrene felt their arrival before she saw them. A sudden, collective roar echoed through the telepathic resonance of the system. Thousands of human minds, all broadcasting the exact same frequency of predatory focus and pack loyalty. What followed defied every Athelian simulation of naval combat. The humans didn't form defensive lines. They didn't calculate optimal standoff ranges. They accelerated. It was pure, unadulterated psychological shock. The smaller human vessels dove straight into the teeth of the Vexian formation. Engines pushed past safe limits, hull plates glowing red-hot from the friction of atmospheric skimming. They weaponized their own momentum. A heavy human cruiser took 3 direct plasma hits, lost its port shielding, and instead of retreating, it rammed its reinforced prow directly through the command deck of a Vexian carrier. It turned out, smaller military forces could completely dismantle numerically superior armadas. It just required a complete disregard for self-preservation and an aggressive embrace of the kill zone. The Vexian lines broke. Their commanders, unable to process the unpredictable, suicidal tactics of a species that refused to die quietly. Lorien stood beside Silas in the ruined throne room, watching the orbital feeds. The heat radiating off his armored suit was a tangible pressure against her skin. He was breathing heavily, his jaw tight, eyes tracking the destruction with cold calculation. He wasn't celebrating the slaughter. He was just doing the math of survival. Ironically, it was the most beautiful, horrific thing she had ever witnessed. Within hours the sky was clear, save for the drifting wrecks of the Vexian fleet. The surviving human ships took up low orbit positions, a jagged ring of steel protecting a world of fragile glass. Silas turned to her. The battle rage had drained from his eyes, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. He looked incredibly vulnerable in that moment, despite the blood drying on his knuckles. He offered a slight, clumsy bow. "The system is secure, Princess," he rasped, his voice rough as gravel. Lorien didn't recoil this time. She stepped forward, closing the distance. She reached out, her cool, delicate fingers hovering just millimeters over the bruised skin of his forearm. The heat of him seeped into her skin. She felt the steady, thudding rhythm of his heart through the ether, a heavy drumbeat of defiant life. When the galaxy's most peaceful race needs a shield, they ally with the universe's most terrifying wolves. "You bled for a people who do not know how to fight," Lorien said softly, her voice carrying the weight of a changing universe. "We fight so others don't have to," Silas replied, his gaze locking with hers. There was no treaty signed in that ruined hall, no grand speeches, just the quiet, heavy understanding between a predator and a pacifist. They had seen the true cost of survival, and they would pay it together.